This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in loving memory and leilui nishmas Malka Esther, bat Dvora, the mother of our dear friend and longtime Parsha Podcast participant, Nissan Hadjibay from Italy. Malka Esther, his mother, passed away about a week ago. May her soul be elevated in heaven. You will be very pleased to learn that this is the last time, please God, in 2025, I will ask you to consider donating to this year's fundraiser, to this year's torch campaign at givetorch.org. Aren't you glad that you won't need to hear this until 2026? We're not quite where we need to be. We haven't reached our goal, but this is the last I'm going to mention on the podcast. givetorch.org. If you're interested in pushing us over the top in lighting the torch in 2025, we deeply appreciate your friendship, your listenership, and of course, your generosity. Please God, we'll have an amazing year. The torch will be lit, and we'll revisit this in 2026. givetorch.org. In this very special edition of the Parsha Podcast, we have two wonderful ideas and a fascinating dilemma. So let's begin. Moshe gathers the people and tells them we're building a tabernacle and we need these 15 different materials, gold, silver, copper, all the types of wool and other fabrics, of course, the wood and the oil. We know the list. And the nation responds with great passion. And the verse tells us, chapter 35, verse 22, Vayavo ha'anashim al hanashim. The men and the women came, everyone who was generous of heart. They brought all their gold and all their various different other materials. This was an overwhelming response to Moshe's call, to God's call, to assemble the materials for the tabernacle. But you'll notice, if you read the actual text of this verse, verse 22, there's some unusual words. The verse says, Vayavo ha'anashim, the men came al hanashim, which literally means on top of the women. They came to bring towards the fundraising effort, towards the coffers of the Tabernacle project. And they came with the women, but it says literally on top of the women, al hanashim. So what does that mean? So of course, all the commentaries address it. It's a bit of an unusual word. Rashi explains that it doesn't literally mean they came on top of them, they came with them. The Ramban says they came after them. The women were more inspired. They came first, and then the men came. Others note that we know there is a certain symmetry, a parallel between the golden calf and the tabernacle. And the women, they were not complicit in the building of the tabernacle, and maybe they weren't carrying the baggage of the tabernacle with them, and therefore they were more inspired. Maybe that's why the women came first. But it is interesting that the Targum Onkelos, the official translation of Onkelos, he goes with the literal translation. There was something on the women. The men came al hanashim, on the women. What does that mean? So this is going to be the appetizer idea of this podcast. The Targum Onkelos, the Onkelos translation says the women came with something on them. Specifically, when they donated their jewelry, and it lists all the different types of jewelries that they donated, their nose rings and earrings and various other gold adornments, these items were on top of them. Now, what is the significance of the fact that the jewelry was on them versus just carrying it in a bag, in a satchel? If you wanted to donate your jewelry towards the fundraising effort, you would take it off and put it in a bag. Maybe you have a lot of jewelry. You want a bunch of bracelets or a bunch of earrings or a bunch of nose rings or a bunch of other gold adornments. You put them all in a bag and you bring it. That's not what happened. It was on them. They were wearing it. So I saw a very nice idea by one of the commentaries. And he says like this: you may have thought that when Moshe said, bring me your gold, bring me your silver, only if you want, this is all optional, contribute towards the effort of building a tabernacle for God to dwell amongst us. People who were inspired may say, you know what? I want to contribute. I want to give. So I'm going to go to my jewelry box and find all the jewelry I haven't worn in 10 years. Still gold, still worthwhile. Let me take all that secondary jewelry and contribute it towards this effort. To dispel that notion, the verse says that the jewelry was on top of them. They were wearing it. This is not the old stuff. This is not the second hand or the hand-me-downs, the old, rusty, out of fashion jewelry that had long since been mothballed. They brought what they were wearing at the time. They brought what was still in style. Middle Bronze Age's finest. Savile Row. They brought the best, and they gave that. And I think this is a very nice idea to get us started here. When the people were asked to give to God, they didn't give something which was, I don't really need it. It's past the prime of its usefulness. They gave the absolute best. And this whole story and the generosity and the dedication of our ancestors is a valuable lesson for us when we have an opportunity to dedicate something towards God, towards our spiritual halves, towards our soul, towards our eternal self. We may be inclined to say, you know what, my real life, my real priorities is the body, is the physicality. The soul's also important, so I'll take all the leftovers and give it to that. No, we should give what's prime. As an example, suppose you are hospitable. You're like Abraham. You want to host guests. Do you give them the prime rib? Do you give them the best of the best, the choicest, the finest of what you have to offer? Or you give them the leftovers? If it's a mitzvah, if it's something which you're doing because the Almighty told you to do it, try to give them the best of the best. We dedicate our time to study, to prayer. Some may say, you know what, it's important to study, but that's like after hours. That's like when I'm tired and I can't work anymore, I can't be productive, then I'll study. Then I'll pray. Then I'll check those boxes of all those spiritual things I need to take care of. No. The lesson over here is the best of the best goes for God. I remember this, I might have mentioned this in the past, but after Hurricane Harvey struck Houston in 2017, a lot of people really mobilized to try to help. People had their homes were destroyed and lots of their property was destroyed. So all sorts of people put stuff in trucks and sent them down to Houston. And some people just sent the oddest of things. There was one person, or I don't even know who it was, maybe it was an institution, that sent 50 kittles. Now, what is a kittel? A kittel is a garment. It's like burial shrouds. It's a plain white garment that we traditionally wear on Yom Kippur, on Seder night. Most have a custom to wear it under the chuppah. It's a very simple white garment. But the most defining characteristic is that it's white. And they showed up with kittles, like 50 kittles, and they were all bluish. There was a run of the kittel through the kittel factory that somehow a little bit of blue dye and everything was tinged blue. So people said, you know what? This is the charity. I'll just ship this all to Houston. Maybe people need new kittels. And I remember thinking about that. You're giving charity, give the best of the best. Our antecedents were very spiritual. And we may think that their generosity and their kindness and their benevolence and their magnanimity was because they didn't care about the physical things. They didn't value the physical things. You read about Abraham and the kindness that he did with those guests. Gave them all a rack of ribs, a tongue in mustard for each one of them. You may think it's because he didn't value those physical articles that he had. We read about Jacob, that Jacob endangered himself. to fetch some small judge that had been stranded on the other side of the stream, of the brook. And the Talmud tells us that tzaddikim, the righteous, their money is more cherished to them than their lives or than their souls. A righteous person realizes that when you have something, it's a gift from God. And therefore, you have to fetch those judges. Don't just disregard them. Yet they tithed. Yet they gave generously. Yet they gave the garments on their back. The jewelry that they were wearing, not last year's collection, the chic new stuff. That is the model of generosity and kind-heartedness that we see in our Parsha and that we are urged to emulate. Idea number 1, to get us warmed up for this final Parsha podcast of this cycle of the book of Exodus. Let's move on to idea number 2. The princes. Everyone who was kind-hearted brought gifts, contributions, donations of these 50 materials towards the Tabernacle fundraising capital campaign. And the verse tells us specifically that the princes, they brought the shoham stones and the miluim stones. There are 14 different stones that are needed for the garments of the high priest. 12 of them are in the choshen, in the breastplate. 2 additional stones are in the shoulder pads of the ephod. Who brought those stones? Who contributed those stones? So the verse tells us that the princes, the Nesim, the heads of the tribes, they brought those 12 stones. And there's a very famous comment in Rashi, we've spoken about this in the past, where Rashi says that actually they brought it at the very end. And even though they made a very generous contribution, there's a bit of an indictment of the princes that they waited until the very end of this fundraising drive to contribute. They had said that we'll cover whatever doesn't get covered. They were obviously men of means. Whatever is not covered by the masses, by the populace, general populace, we will cover. They had thought there would be a lot to still pay for after all the lay people had made their donations. But the people gave so generously. And all that was left at the end was these stones and some of the oils and other spices. And that was given by the princes. And Rashi tells us that if you look at the word Hanesim, Vahanesim and the princes, it's missing a few letters, or maybe 1 letter, maybe 2 letters. Why? Because that is a bit of a criticism that they waited until the very end. Very interesting idea we've spoken about in the past. But there's a new idea here. Where did they get these stones from? They're in the desert. They're not exactly in a mine somewhere finding precious stones. Where did they get the stones from? So the Midrash tells us that the stones descended with the manna. With the manna came other things, other essentials. For example, the Midrash tells us that perfume and makeup for the women came with the manna. Like toiletries. Toiletries were delivered. It's like a DoorDash, just shows up at your door. Instacart. Uber Eats. Just showed up there. And the Midrash tells us that the stones, these precious stones that were needed for the tabernacle, for the vestments of the high priest, they came with the manna, specifically with the manna that was apportioned towards the princes. And this is why the Or HaChaim tells us, if you look at the list of the 15 different items that were needed for the tabernacle, it starts off apparently in order of value. It starts gold, and then silver, and then, of course, copper. So from most precious to least precious. And then it continues, apparently, along that trajectory from most precious and valuable to least precious and valuable. And the question that the Or HaChaim asked is, wait a minute, how come the stones are listed at the very end? They're more precious than even the gold. The Talmud famously tells us a story that one of the stones were missing, and they had to find it, they had to replace it, and the profit of the gem dealer was either 600,000 gold coins or 800,000 gold coins. So they're the most valuable, they should be listed first. So the Chaim says, well, yes, they're the most valuable, but they didn't have to work so hard to get it because it was just given to them for free. So yes, it is an order of importance, but when you get something for free and you don't sweat over it, you don't toil over it, it doesn't hurt you so much to part ways with it because you got it for free after all. It's actually less valuable in the eyes of God because what God values is how hard it was for you to do it. How difficult was it for you to do it, to give it? How much did you have to overcome to accomplish it? And yes, if you just were to evaluate the price, the cost of these stones, it would be higher than the gold, but still, in the eyes of the Torah, it's less valuable. So that's based upon the idea that these stones came with the manna. But there's another interpretation as to the origin of the stones. We know that the nation before the Exodus, God tells Moshe, tell the people, plead with them to go to their Egyptian neighbors and borrow. Yeah, we need to borrow some stuff for our journey. We need some gold, some jewelry, some precious garments. And this would be a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that when the nation leaves after 400 years of servitude, they'll leave with great wealth. And indeed, the nation goes and they borrow from their Egyptian neighbors klei chesef v'klei zahav, gold and silver and garments, all sorts of precious things. And the Almighty made the Israelites, the nation, made them filled them with favor and grace. So the Egyptians just said yes. They were almost like duped into it. They were hypnotized. They couldn't say no. And indeed, the nation plundered Egypt. And of course, they were justified in doing so, the Talmud tells us, because they were enslaved for many decades, if not centuries, without being paid. So they were justified in taking what was rightfully theirs. The nation plundered Egypt, cleaned house, and emerged, indeed, as was promised to Abraham, with great wealth. And part of the plunder, says the Ibn Ezra, part of the plunder were precious gems, precious stones, the Shoham stones, and the Miluim stones. And then he says something unbelievable. How come the princes ended up with the precious stones? Think about it. If God makes you irresistible to your Egyptian neighbors, whatever you ask for, they're going to say yes. Why wouldn't everyone ask for those stones? How come only the princes have the stones, or only the princes are given the stones, are donating the stones? Says the Ibn Ezra, every person asked from their Egyptian neighbor only what they conceived as being reasonable. The nation, the multitude of Israelites, they weren't as ambitious. They didn't have as grand aspirations as the princes. So what did they ask for? They asked for small things. They wanted some nice clothing. After all, they were wearing old, tattered garments of slaves. So it's quite natural that you want to solve your immediate problem. And my Egyptian friends, we can ask them for anything. Let's get some nice garments to replace what we're wearing with something more respectable. That was their ambition. That's what they asked. And that's what they got. And others had maybe grander ambitions. I want some metal. some precious metal. Give me some copper, or maybe even silver, or maybe even gold, or luxurious dyed wool. The most ambitious of the nation, says the Ibn Ezra, were the princes. Even in Egypt, they were men of great stature. And they went for the most valuable of items. They went to the richest people in town, knocked on their door, and asked them for their precious gems and stones. And that's what they asked for, and that's what they got. They went into the treasure houses and they asked for an all-access pass to borrow, of course, the crown jewels of Egypt. And God made sure that their request was granted. So when it comes the time, says the Ibn Ezra, for the nation to give towards the fundraising effort of the Tabernacle, the only people that had these precious gems and stones were the princes. And this, I think, is a fantastic lesson for us. We're only limited by our ambitions and the grandness of our conceptualizations of greatness. If you want to achieve amazing things, you have to have amazing dreams and ambitions. We see about these princes, we see two things about the princes. They were princes, meaning that they were great people, the leaders of their tribe. And seemingly, irrespective of that, they also happened to have the stones that no one else had. What the Ibn Ezra says is that those two are just two sides of one coin. Why were they the greatest of their tribesmen? Because they had the grandest ambitions. Why did they have stones when no one else had them? Because they had the grandest ambitions. Why were they princes and everyone else not princes? We see something profound into their character. They achieved greatness above and beyond their peers. Why? Because everyone else, what they wanted, give me some garments. You know what? Give me some silver. Wouldn't that be great? Even gold. That's what everyone else subsisted with. They coasted. The princes, they had the most outrageous ambitions, and that's why they ended up as princes, and that's also why they ended up with those stones. What the Ibn Ezra is implying here is that the fundamental difference between someone who reaches the absolute pinnacle, the top, the peak, the absolute apex, and those who don't is just how outrageous are their dreams. The princes had outrageous dreams, and that manifested itself by them wanting the stones and asking for the stones and getting the stones. And that same characteristic led them to transcendent greatness, to be the greatest of their tribesmen. They wanted it more. They wanted more greatness, and they got it. And I think this idea appears elsewhere in our Parsha. Moshe gives the instructions and makes the fundraising call. And within 2 days, all the materials are assembled, and it's time to build. And who actually built the tabernacle and all its vessels and vestments? So we know the names of two people. Bezalel, of course, he's the major overseer of the project. And his lieutenant is Ahaliav. And then there's other volunteers, volunteer artisans and craftsmen, men and women. Who are these people? And what credentials did they have? What qualifications do they have? What training did they undergo to be worthy of that? How did they know how to deal with all these very intricate and delicate items? So there's a Ramban. We mentioned this Ramban in the past. I think it's important to revisit it every year. The verse tells us, both in last week's Parsha and in this week's Parsha, when God introduces Bezalel to Moshe, and when Moshe introduces Bezalel to the nation, it says something about Bezalel that he was different, that he was a sight to behold. Behold, Re'eh, God calls by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, to the tribe of Judah. That's when God told Moshe in chapter 31, when Moshe told the nation in chapter 35. In both instances, it says that Bezalel is something that you have to see. Otherwise, you won't believe it. And the Ramban explains, Bezalel, he knew what to do all the different types of work. You think of someone who was a great artisan or a great craftsman, they maybe have one area of expertise. But Bezalel, he was like a jack of all trades, but also the best of the best in each one of those disparate fields. And that's something which is just not believable. You have to behold it. Otherwise you won't believe it. And that's particularly noteworthy given that just previously they had been slaves. They weren't trained in the delicate and fine arts needed to make all the things in the tabernacle. And Bezalel also knew, says the Ramban, he knew not just how to make it, but also the deeper secrets. The Talmud tells us that Bezalel knew how to combine letters in the same way, so to speak, that God combined, I think that's the right way to say it, letters when he created the world. The creation of the tabernacle on some level is like a recreation of the world, and Bezalel knew all the secrets. Moreover, the Ramban tells us, citing a midrash, that there's a book called the Chronicles of Adam. And in it, it lists every great person in every generation, all the descendants of Adam in their respective generation, all the big shots and bigwigs and movers and shakers. And in the book of Adam, there's an entry. And the entry lists Bezalel as the builder of the tabernacle. So Bezalel is something that you have to behold. He's such a complete outlier. He's a wunderkind. He has such supernatural abilities, and he's been designated since the times of Adam as the one who must build the tabernacle. What about everyone else? There was a call for materials for the tabernacle, but there was also a call for volunteers to help Bezalel and Aholiav. And many people joined and were inspired to participate and contributed, were the foot soldiers of this grand initiative. And who were they? Were they phenoms too? Were they wunderkinds too? Were they designated also since the times of Adam to be the ones to contribute, to partner with Bezalel and Aholiav to build the tabernacle? The verse says something else. The verse says, every person whose heart was elevated, whose heart was inspired, whose heart was ascendant, they came to help Bezalel construct the tabernacle. The words that the Torah uses to describe all of the helpers, all of the volunteers who came to join this effort, their heart was elevated. All the builders, all the craftsmen and artisans who joined Bezalel in constructing the Mishkan, the tabernacle and all its vessels and vestments, their heart was elevated. Their heart ascended. And the Ramban explains, these people had no pedigree in the craftsmanship that they worked on. But they were just inspired. And even though they weren't trained, they discovered some innate, latent, natural talent. That even though they didn't have any formal training, and didn't have any apprenticeship, And there wasn't like the traditional method of learning a trade or a skill or a vocation. Their heart just ascended and brought with it some natural ability that they always had. It seems like there's a difference between Bezalel and everyone else. Bezalel, he was just designated since the times of Adam. And he was someone who had all those talents, and he was just positioned in the world to do this. Those other people, it wasn't that they necessarily had some sort of preternatural ability over their peers. They made a choice. They made a decision. Their heart ascended. They're not outliers like Bezalel. They weren't endowed necessarily with some supernatural abilities. What separates them from everyone else is that their heart ascended. They're not in the book of Adam, and they don't have any qualification or skill set aside from the fact that their heart ascended. I think we can suggest that this is another example of the princes choosing greatness. Their heart was inspired to seek more. And they found more when they sought it. They found more greatness just as people who ascended above their peers, their tribesmen. And they sought greatness. If I'm going to ask the neighbor for something, I'll ask for the absolute best. Similarly, these people, their heart ascended. Like, what business do you have in working with the fine skills of metallurgy or weaving in these intricate patterns or making these very precise cuts of this very delicate wood or making these brackets and laying in these precious stones or spinning these yarns that are comprised of linen and wool and gold to make gold into a yarn, into a thread. What business do you have doing that? They didn't necessarily have anything different than anyone else. They were inspired. Their heart ascended. They sought it. And when you seek it hard enough, if you want it hard enough, if you pray hard enough, nothing will stop you. And even things that are not necessarily something that you're designed for or that you're trained for. And if we were to look at it just assessing the feasibility of you doing it, we would say, well, maybe no. Doesn't matter. Your heart ascended above all of that. And you found that you could do it. Now, most people are scared of this. The majority asked for smaller things in Egypt. The majority said, we're not going to volunteer. What do I know about making the tabernacle? And in every area of life, people say, well, I don't know. I'm not really qualified. I didn't go to school for this. This is not part of my area of expertise. Where's the playbook to know what to do? Maybe if you show me how to do it, I'll know how to do it. Most people are not cut out for greatness. Not because that they have no way of achieving it, but because they don't go for it. Bezalel is the outlier. He's the one that's in the book. He's just destined for it. He has all these skills and it's something to marvel at. But everyone else doesn't have that. The artisans that helped were not someone to marvel at. They were regular, ordinary Joes. Now, of course, no Jew is ordinary. Every Jew is extraordinary. I know that. But still, there was nothing really that separated them from their neighbors, aside from the fact that their heart ascended. When people were allowed to choose what they wanted, most had very small ambitions. Maybe they were big, but they weren't massive, the biggest possible. The princes, they had an ascendant heart. I want to go to Fort Knox with tractor trailers, 18-wheelers. I'm cleaning house over here. You have to have a lot of guts to do that. A lot of outrageous, bold ambition to do that. But it's not really in the cards. And it's not really what you're designated for. So what? will will it to happen. Go for the gold. Go for the gems. An ascendant heart will bring you to very lofty places. The princes asked for more, and they got more. Those who had an inspired heart asked for more, and they got more. And the rules and limitations, they just melted away. The Mishnah tells us, if you accept upon yourself the yoke of Torah, all the other yokes, the yoke of derech eretz, the way of the world, they go away. What does that mean? It means that there's certain rules, certain limitations, certain areas that are cordoned off, and you cannot access it. VIPs only. That's the rules of the world. Sorry, I didn't make the rules. These are the rules. When a person accepts upon themselves the yoke of Torah, they're saying, those rules just don't apply to me. Those limitations are gone. They no longer apply. You're not operating on the same plane. We learn about having big dreams. But it's not my pedigree. So what? Who says you can't finish both Talmuds? The Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. But I can't even read a full page without my mind starting to dream about all the things, reveries and daydreaming. I can't learn all of Torah by heart. I can accomplish great things in areas of service of God and kindness. I can achieve. I'm a regular person. Yeah, if you say that, you'll stay a regular person. We learn about having ambition, having a dream. You're not cut out for it. So what? Accept the yoke of greatness, and all those other rules disappear. And I think this applies not just in pursuit of spiritual greatness. The best quality for an entrepreneur is just a little bit of delusion. I remember hearing from someone who made a lot of money in real estate. Not that I know how much money someone made, but that's the impression. And he was saying that what's the difference between like buying a house for $500,000 or $1 million, which is a transaction that's very common, and buying like a building for $250 million or $100 million. I'm not going to use the actual words that he said because it's not really fitting. But he said something like, you have to have the size of your guts, you have to have just bigger guts. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. This is what we're learning in our Parsha. Big guts, big dreams, big ambitions. I want the most precious stones that if I were to sell them, it will be a profit of 600,000 or 800,000 gold coins. That's what I want. That attitude brings people to the top, to the peak, to the acme. Let's get to this week's dilemma. Nay, dilemma. What to do? What do we do when life throws us challenges? What do we do when we have to make unnatural and awkward twists and turns in life? We're trying to build a life for ourselves. We're trying to build a life with strong values, with strong ideals, priorities. But all sorts of things happen. How do we hold fast to our values, to our identity that we're trying to forge? How do we make sure that the spiritual edifice that we are building in our life remains strong and resolute, come what may? Life is full of surprises, twists and turns. How do we maneuver those twists and turns without losing all that we worked so hard to achieve? And I want to share a very powerful idea to maybe address this dilemma. We're reading about the Tabernacle a lot. A lot of people don't find so much value in it, and they find it's a little boring, very technical. And of course, we're training ourselves to see that there's so much beauty and insight and wisdom and powerful ideas in every line, in every sentence, in every word, in every drop of ink. But one of the meta ideas that we're told is that just as the nation was told to build a tabernacle for God, a cozy home for God to dwell in, so to speak, we have to do that within ourselves. We have to make ourselves into a tabernacle, a temple for God. Our life, our home, our family. It's like a tabernacle. It's a place where God feels comfortable, so to speak. And thus we have to study the tabernacle. The Kabbalists talk about how the tabernacle represents even the image of a human body is like laid out in a tabernacle. The mouth is the altar, and the eyes and the nose are the shulchan, the table, and the menorah, and the inner altar, the golden altar, and the brain is like the ark, and there's like the body and all that. That's Kabbalistic. We don't know what that means. But in a more broad sense, the tabernacle and all the different steps are building something which is, when it's done, it's a place that can serve as a domicile, so to speak, for God to dwell in. We have to do that ourselves. We have to clear away the foreign God within us and create the room in which God can rule over us and we can submit ourselves to his dominion. There's a very interesting part of this tabernacle. As we know, the tabernacle itself was comprised of wooden beams. And they were stacked, not horizontally as you might imagine, but vertically. And at the base of each one of these beams was a silver socket. And at the top there was a golden ring that connected the beams to each other. But there were also bars, horizontal bars, that went on top of these wooden vertical beams. And there was one bar in particular that was very unique, the Bria Chatichon, the middle bar. And the Talmud tells us that this was a miraculous bar. Because this bar went through the beams, not on top of the beams, but through them. So imagine you drill a hole through each beam and you put a bar through that hole. So if I have two beams, I'm 5 feet in, I drill a hole and the holes align with each other, I can stick a horizontal bar or like a wooden beam to go through it horizontally. But the Talmud tells us that it was miraculous in that it was only one bar that went through the entire length of the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was like three parts of it, 3 walls in 3 different directions. One side was open, and then there was, one wall, and then it made a right turn, and another wall, and then made another right turn. It was like a rectangle with one side open. Yet the Talmud tells us it was a miracle that the bar went through it, and when it reached the end, it made a right turn. And then it reached the end, it made another right turn. Until the 70 cubits of all 3 walls had a 70 cubit long wood bar snaking through it. It went almost 30 cubits, made a right turn for 10 cubits, made another right turn for 30 more, a total of 70 cubits. It swiveled, almost like the cherubs. And our sages tell us, in a well-built edifice, there's something that keeps it all together. There's like a glue that unites all the different parts together. And that is true for the physical edifice of the tabernacle. It's also true for any spiritual edifice that's modeled after the tabernacle. There's something that snakes through every part of the whole complex, the whole enterprise, the whole venture. There's one thing that really unites it all. There's one theme, one value, one principle that permeates the entirety of the venture. It's found from one end to the other. But it's malleable. It bends, it turns corners. No matter which direction it goes, this middle bar accompanies it. Now, what's interesting is that our sages tell us where this bar came from. Where did this 170-foot long, or 70 cubits, it's even longer than that, 70 cubit long bar, magical bar, where did it come from? So there are different opinions. One opinion says that it was the stick that Jacob crossed over the Jordan with. But the Targum Yonasan, Jonathan ben Uziel, he tells us that Abraham planted a tree, an eshel, in Beersheba. This is in Genesis chapter 21, verse 33. Abraham planted an eshel. What's an eshel? Eshel stands for eating, drinking, accompaniment. Abraham instituted an empire of kindness, of hospitality, of generosity and benevolence that doubled as a place where everyone can learn about God. Abraham embodied kindness and showed the world kindness that is in some way resembling the kindness of God. And that's how he taught humanity about faith. So this eshel, this institution that Abraham established, this is the source material that binds and unites this tabernacle together. Kindness that leads to faith. That is what holds it all together. This, if we were to ask, well, what does our nation stand for? Like, well, who embodies our nation? It's Abraham. And what does Abraham do? What does he stand for? Bringing God to the world and changing yourself, turning yourself into a giver, a benevolent person who cares about others and wants to elevate them. That's what the tabernacle, the unification of all parts of the tabernacle. Now, each person has to build their own tabernacle. And we are told that every descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will embody an attribute, either that is similar to Abraham or to Isaac or to Jacob. These are three different realms of our service of God. There's the Torah, avoda, which means Torah and service of God, and of course, kindness. That's the three-legged stool that holds up the nation. But towering above it all is Abraham and his eshel. But every person and every family finds their quality, their element, their attribute. What's the one thing that undergirds my life? What's the one thing that undergirds the life of our family? What's that one theme that our family exemplifies, that our tabernacle will have at its heart, that will permeate every part of our tabernacle, our spiritual edifice that we are trying to build? I made a bit of a project with my kids. We didn't finish it. I said, we have to make a Walby family coat of arms. Now, it sounds a little megalomaniacal, but I think it's important for us, for every family, but our family, we're Walbys. We're special. And we're part of a dynasty. We're scions of a dynasty. And we come from very special people, and we stand for something. And that's how I wanted to make your coat of arms. And we started to do it. It was like a project. And what does our family stand for? What values do we have? What makes us tick? I think that way of thinking is trying to find that middle bar that encompasses really all that we're trying to build. What are the qualities that symbolize our family and us as individuals? What's that one quality that is found everywhere? That one attribute that really is the crown jewel of our spiritual life? What are the principles, the qualities, the values, the attributes that we identify with, that we personify, that we embody? You find that, you have found your spiritual middle bar. And that will accompany you every step of the way. And that will ensure that your edifice will have continuity and will be united and will be strong. But all this is provided that you're willing to maneuver with it. You take a turn, it's with you. You make a left turn, it's there with you. You make a right turn, you're not escaping it. If you have that middle bar that holds it all together, your edifice will be strong and will endure. So maybe we should go back to that project. Maybe we should fill out that coat of arms, because if this is in, this idea, this theme is in the tabernacle, we're trying to build a tabernacle. We're trying to create the conditions within ourselves, within our families, for the presence of God to come. And part of that is finding something that snakes through every part of it and is there in different ways and different manifestations and twists and turns. It is there and it ensures the continuity and the durability and the viability of our edifice, our tabernacle that we are trying to build. May we be so fortunate as to build a tabernacle for God within ourselves, within our hearts, and may God, in the presence of God, dwell within us as individuals, as families, as, of course, a nation. I appreciate your attention. Have a fantastic day. Have a stupendous, sensational, terrific, splendid Shabbos upcoming. And please, God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll gather together again next week. You want to come join us live in person, torchzoom.com, Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central. We'll gather together for the Parsha Podcast. Please, God, my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.